Okay, good morning. It's so good to have you here. I wanted to start with a question today, just for you to personally answer in your own life. And it's a question in regards to, we've been looking at the Ten Commandments, and it's a question in regards to the command that we're looking at today, which deals with rest. And my question for you to kind of take a look at yourself with is, what's the larger percentage of your life? When it comes to your experience of rest, would you say there's a larger percentage of your life where you feel rested, or a larger percentage of your life where you feel exhausted? And do you find yourself asking questions like, why can't I sleep? Why can't I rest? Why can't I unplug? Why can't I unwind? Why can't we slow down? If you're like the majority of people in our country, in our culture, the answer to those questions is, well, number one, I feel more exhausted. If I were to give a percentage of my life, the higher percentage is I'm tired a lot. And those other questions, that feeling of unrest, feeling of a lack of peace in your life, there is good news. The bad news is that the majority of people in our country, perhaps in our church today, perhaps you personally, feel a lack of rest, you feel exhausted, and there's good news this morning. And the good news is in regards to this command that we're looking to, not a suggestion, not a permission, but something God is commanding us to do, which is to rest. All right, but before we get to that, if you're visiting this morning, we're glad you're here. We're in a series called The 10, where we're looking at the 10 Commandments. And a few things that I'll say about the whole series, just kind of bring you up to date, is number one, the very first thing we looked at is context matters. And the context is God's love and grace. It's God's love and grace. When God gives those commands to Israel in Exodus chapter 20, He roots it in the fact that He has saved and rescued them because He chose them, because He loved them, and He's given them His grace. He saved and rescued them out of Egypt. He didn't come and say, hey, you're slaves in Egypt. If you want to get free, you've got to do this, 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 and this. No, first He comes and He saves and He gives grace and He rescues them out. And now He says, you're free and I want you to live free, and here's how that works. So number one, you've got to remember the context whenever we're looking at these laws. They are not arbitrary rules of a tyrant. Right? These are loving commands from a Father who cares, not difficult rules of a dictator who just wants to control you. This is a Father who loves you. That's what He's doing here, is He's saying, listen, I love you, and my desire for you is to truly live and to be free. And if you want to experience that, that's what I want for you. If you want to experience that, then let me tell you how life works. So number one, context matters. Number two, the order of the commands matters. These are not just a random list that God kind of threw together. There's a reason that they're in the order they're in. And I'll just give you one. The biggest example is the first command. You shall have no other gods before me. There's a reason that that's the first command. And the reason is if you keep that command, you will naturally keep the other 9. If you break any of the other 9, it's because you've already broken the first command. So order counts. There's a reason that they're the way they are. God's word, God spoke these things, and He speaks and speaks to us in a way that's organized, and there's a purpose behind it. And then the third thing, and we haven't really talked about this very much, is that there's really the law. There's 2 sides to the law. It's like one coin with 2 sides. The first side is the first 4 commands. And we're looking at the fourth this morning. And these laws, these commands, all deal with our relationship to God. They're the vertical laws. These are the ones that are referring to and talking to us about how we're relating with God. You shall have no other gods. You'll have no other idols. You not use the name of the Lord in vain. And now this morning we're looking at Sabbath. These 4 commands are dealing directly into our relationship with God. The other side of that coin is our relationship with each other. And those are the second set, which is 6. The other 6 commands, thou shalt honor your parents, you won't murder, don't covet, no adultery, no stealing, no covet. It's all in regards to our relationship to each other, and it's one coin with 2 sides. It's not 2 separate things that aren't connected. These are 2 interconnected things. When Jesus asks the lawman to summarize the whole law, He can say, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. Because that's the summary of the law. When we love God, we'll love each other. And if we truly love each other, it's rooted in the fact you cannot love the people sitting next to you if it is not grounded in the love of God and your love for Him. It doesn't work. You can't do it. If you're in a relationship with God that is based on works and fear, you can't love other people. You can't. And I don't have time to go through the explanation of that. It's just, that's the way it works. They're interconnected. The way we relate to God is directly connected to the way that we relate to each other. And it's grounded in, our relationship with each other is meant to be grounded in our relationship to God, which is where He starts. And now we've come to the fourth command. And I'll say this before we dig into it, is every single one of these commands is important. But in certain times, in certain places, in fact, even in our individual lives, there's certain commands that we really need to give a little bit of an emphasis to. Every law is important, but if you look at the New Testament, Paul writes to different churches. When Paul wrote to the church in Ephesus, every command mattered, but one of the things that he really emphasized, that he focused on, was the command to not commit adultery, of being faithful to your spouse, because they lived in a culture at that time that celebrated and encouraged extramarital affairs. It was part of their pagan religion in that area. That's what they were encouraged to do. It was something that was in the culture. When Paul wrote to the church in Corinth, if you remember, one of the things that he addressed was really coveting. You have certain gifts and I have certain gifts, but I want your gifts because I think they're better than mine. And I don't, or it's, there's pride. I have better gifts than you have. There's idolatry in the sense that he was addressing their worship. Some say I follow Apollos. Some say I follow Paul. Some say I find my identity in my super spirituality because I'm so much better than you. At the end of the day, Paul's addressing idolatry. And so every single one of these laws is important. But there are certain times when we really need to emphasize a particular law. And I believe the one we're looking at this morning is at the top of our list. And let me tell you just briefly why. Number one, I believe that it's at the top of our list because of the way we talk about Sabbath rest. The command is that this is a day that is to be holy unto the Lord. 6 days shall you work, the seventh you shall cease. It's in the 10 Commandments, and yet, how do we talk about it? Do we talk about it as a command or as a suggestion? Do we treat it as a command or we treat it as a suggestion? When we talk about Sabbath, when people think about it, we often think about it in terms of, that would be really nice to add that to my life. I should probably work that in. Could you imagine if we talked about murder that way? Boy, I should really stop killing people. That would probably be a good thing to work in my life. I'll get there. Or stealing. Yeah, I've been stealing all the time, and I know that's probably be better to not steal. I should work that into my life this week. That's how we treat Sabbath. That's how we treat rest. It'd be good to work it into my life, and I'll do that at some point in time, but I really can't do it now, as if it's not in the 10 Commandments. Now, I know that there is an argument today that says, well, we as Christians don't have to Sabbath anymore. We don't need to rest anymore like Israel used to. That was for Israel, and now we're not under law, we're under grace, so we don't have to rest anymore. Then here's my question to you. Why in the world did God put it in the 10 Commandments then? Why would He put it in the 10 Commandments? And by the way, I would challenge you to take me to a verse where God says, you don't have to Sabbath any longer. You don't need rest. I know verses that people use, but I've never seen a verse that literally says, you don't have to Sabbath anymore. It's not part of the 10 suggestions. There's a reason that God put it in the commandments alongside of adultery and murder and not having idols and no other gods before you, because it's something that is meant to be the baseline for all people at all times. Including today, including you. So number one, I think it's at the top of our list because of the way we think about it as a suggestion instead of a command. That's how we treat it. All right, you know it as well as I do. I'm going to tell you up front that this is one that I struggle with. This is an area in my life. And my wife would agree, and she would tell you, she's probably going to think a couple times this morning, is he listening to himself? I'm going to try. And I believe that this is something that many pastors are guilty of breaking this command. Right? That's the third one on the list that's there in your notes, is because of the way that pastors lead their churches and fail to lead by example in practicing the Sabbath. I could share example of people that you know and have heard of pastors, really big names, who have failed to practice this and have paid the price as a result. In fact, I remember a story of a guy who wrote a book. I can't remember the title of it, but his name is Wayne Corderio. Anyways, he's a pastor in Hawaii, and he started a church there, and it's growing, and it's growing, it's growing. And he's just constantly working and working and working. And one day he's out for a run, and his whole body shuts down. And he basically has to get down on the ground, and his legs stop working because he's overworked it. As leaders go, so go the followers. Pastors and elders are meant to be lead shepherds within the church. And if pastors and leaders aren't Sabbathing, then why in the world, and we're not resting, then why would we expect that anybody else is going to? We lead by example. We should be leading by example. And actually we do. It's just in this area, lots of pastors fail at it. And it's something that I need to make sure that I'm doing. It's something that we, as staff, as elders, we need to make sure that we really are resting and challenging you to rest at the same time. All right, third reason that is actually number 2 in there is the lack of difference between Christians and the world in terms of work ethic. Stop and just ask yourself a question. If you work, wherever your livelihood is, whether it's in your home or out in the workplace, is there any difference between the way you do your work and the way the people around you who are not Christians do their work? Is there a difference? Or are we basically functioning the same as everybody else? And I believe, as I look at the way that I work, as the way I look at other people and their work lives, is that there really isn't a difference. We're doing exactly the same things that everybody else in the world is doing. And I've heard the whole, well, we're Christians, but we're not really different from everybody else. We're really just, because we're just saved by grace, so there's not a difference. I would tell you that that's a lie and that that's not true. Today we're celebrating baptism, and baptism, it represents 2 things. It represents the whole of Christianity, but 2 things. Number 1, when you go under the water, it represents us being united with Christ in his death. You've died. If you're a Christian, you've died to your old life. That's no longer your identity. When you get raised up out of the water, it's a symbolic of your identity with Christ and his resurrection. You have a whole new life. To say that you're not different from the world is to basically say, I'm still really dead. I would say there's a pretty vast difference between a dead person and a person who's alive. There's people who are spiritually dead and people who are spiritually alive. There is a radical difference there. And when we look at this command and we look at the idea of resting, this should be something that stands out in our lives, that we should be so different. People are running around, they're hectic, they're stressed, they're constantly run down, and they should be able to look at us and say, man, how is it that you are so rested? How is it that you have such peace and rest? And by the way, it's not just meant to be that one day, though we'll talk about that in a moment. It should permeate your whole life, that there should be a spirit of rest that flows out of your day of rest. People should be able to look at us and say, why can't I have that? But I don't see that happening a lot. And then the last reason, and there's so many, I just can't give you all. There's this last one I'll give to you, is because of how many Christians are constantly tired. We need to talk about this because we don't know how to rest. And again, here's the wonderful thing. God is not just giving us permission to rest. He's not just saying, hey, it's okay if you sit down for a little bit and take a break from your work. He's not saying that. It's a command. He's not just saying it's okay, he's saying it's necessary. Not just saying you can do this, he's saying you have to do this. He's commanding you to rest. So that's what we're looking at this morning. In fact, let's read the passage together right now. Exodus chapter 20. Excuse me. Exodus chapter 20, starting in verse 8. And would you stand with me as we read? This is God speaking. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. But the 7th is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your male servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy. It's God's word. Let's pray together. Father, this is your word, not man's word, yours. So God, I pray that I know that you speak to us through this, and I pray today as you are speaking that you would enable us to hear you. That you would really show us our own hearts, show us what's getting in the way of us fulfilling this. And Lord, help us to stop excusing our lack of rest. Help us to stop debating our case with resting. Help us to recognize who we are and why you've given us this as a gift. This is a gift from you, Lord, for us. Help us to treat it that way, to see it that way. And Lord, even this morning, that you would bless us with that rest here in this place together, that we would have a taste of that. And for those who are really worn out right now, who are burnt out, who are tired, exhausted, who are just wrestling with unplugging and unwinding and finding renewal, Lord, that today you would bless them with your truth. That you would show them that they're free to rest. And it's because of you. God, we pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. You can be seated. So there's just a few things I want to point out here this morning. Number one, what is Sabbath rest? Let's talk about what it is. Number two, why God gave it to us. God gave this to us as a gift, but why? What's its purpose? Number three, let's talk about why we don't rest. In fact, I want you to think about this question as we go through. Why is it that you aren't able to rest? Why is it that you're so tired? Why is it that you don't practice this command? What is it that gets in the way of you actually resting and obeying God in this? And probably you have things that are already popping into your head. You've already got things that are going on up here that you know is in the way. And we're going to talk about that. But last, we are going to talk about how we can begin to practice this, how we can begin to live it. Again, not just to fit it in, but to make it a priority. This is not something that you say, well, yeah, it's a good idea to add that in at some point, but you don't understand, Dan. You don't know how busy I am and what I have to do. We'll talk about it. But I know that we all have this inner attorney, an inner lawyer, who wants to argue in defense of our case. And I'm going to tell you to shut that person down this morning and just let God speak to you on this. Just listen. Don't argue. Just let it process in you. All right, but number one, what is Sabbath? Well, you take a look. Let's just look at the verses. All right, Exodus 20, verse 8. It's actually quite simple. It's not complicated, but boy, we make it complicated. We make it much more complicated than what it is. Here's what he says. Remember the Sabbath day. And by the way, do you know what the word Sabbath means? It means to cease. Sabbath is the ceasing day. It's the stopping day. Remember, and by the way, there's a reason God says remember. First of all, this isn't the first time he's enacting this command. He actually was doing this earlier in the book of Exodus after he rescued Israel out of Egypt. He's already been working on this with them, but he's also saying, this is something that's easy for you to forget. You need to remember this. You need to remind yourself. I find that Christianity, our journey, is a series of reminders that we need all the time. We don't need a bunch of new stuff constantly. We need to be reminded of the truth consistently, the foundation. So he says, remember the stopping day and keep it holy. And here's what I want to point out. It's a day. He doesn't say remember the Sabbath hour. Now, again, the internal lawyer in us is going to argue this case, and I've heard it. It doesn't have to be a day, Dan. That's really legalistic. Listen, the Pharisees were legalistic, and here's how they were legalistic. They added to the Sabbath day itself. They made rules so that basically, and by the way, still being practiced today, people can't even push buttons on the Sabbath day. They added to it to make it impossible an ungrace-filled day. That's what they did with it. I'm not being legalistic. If I read this passage, it says Sabbath day. The internal lawyer in us wants to say, well, but I can Sabbath each day. True. In fact, every single day, there should be a Sabbath rest within you. Let's be honest. You can't go through your week without resting each day. There's no one in here who can go 24/7 every single day of the week without resting. You're just saying, I got to rest each day. I get that. God is saying this is a day that's meant to be holy. In other words, it's meant to be unique. It's meant to be special. It's meant to stand out. It's meant to be different from all the other days of the week. Not the same as the rest of the week. And again, you can disagree with me. It's okay. There are people who would say, no, I can Sabbath each day and I don't really need to set one day aside. I say if you look at this passage and you read it carefully and just simply, if I don't bring all my baggage to this, if I don't try to read this through the lens of my cultural, workaholic nature, if I just try to read this as God has intended it, it tells me it's a day. It's a day that is be holy and set apart, unique from the rest of it. And here's why it's not complicated. Here's what he says, and how is it to be different from the rest of your week? Here's what he says, verse 9. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. Is that unclear? I don't feel like it's complicated, but we make it very complicated. We make it much broader and bigger than what it is. I will put it very simply for you. God says, 6 days of the week, you do your livelihood. You do your career. You do that thing that provides for you and any of those who are being provided for by you. You do that for 6 days. On the seventh day, one day of the week, you stop your career. Whatever that is. Whatever you do, whatever your livelihood is, it can be out in the workplace, it can be in your home. Whatever your livelihood is, one day a week, you're supposed to cease. Sabbath, it's stopping. Do you see why I can say, I don't believe that it's just an hour a day that I can Sabbath and I just work all the time. God doesn't say work all the time and just take a break each day. He says there's one day when you're supposed to not work at all, not do your livelihood. Right? If you're a lawyer, you're not a lawyer that day. If you're a police officer, you're not a police officer that day. If I'm a pastor, I'm supposed to not be a pastor that day in terms of doing my job. If you're a stay-at-home mom, let me say what it doesn't mean before I finish the sentence. Let me say what this doesn't mean. Number one, it doesn't mean you don't have to take care of your kids anymore. The command to Sabbath is rooted in God's rest on the seventh day. Did God stop caring for his children on the seventh day? Did he say, hey, Adam and Eve, I'm resting today, don't talk to me. Go watch the trees grow. No. It wasn't a day to stop taking care of each other. In fact, I will show you the Sabbath is meant to be a day that enables us to better care for each other. It isn't, number two, it isn't a day to sit on the couch and watch TV all day long. And look, I've been there. I've done it myself. And you know, if you've done it, you know you could watch TV all day long and be more tired the next day than you were the day before. It isn't rest. Not the kind of rest we're talking about, and I'll explain why. Right? And then number three, again, it's right there on your notes. Oh, no, it's not actually on your notes. It's what it doesn't mean. Okay, it's not a disconnecting from life. It's a reconnecting to life. It's not a disengaging from life altogether, but rather a reconnecting to life. So when I say you stop doing your job, doesn't mean you stop caring for each other. It means that you stop doing the livelihood that you have to do the rest of the week. The laundry, the cleaning, the cooking, all the stuff that you have to do to provide. This is a day of rest. This is a day when you're not supposed to do that. In fact, back in Exodus 16, when God first commands the people of Israel, if you remember, they're supposed to collect manna each day for their food. And the reason that God did this, he said, you can't store extra. You just take enough for the day. If you store extra, it rots. And some people stored extra. And it rotted, and there were worms in it, and all the stuff that God said was going to happen to it. The reason he was doing that, teach them to rely on him a day at a time. But on the sixth day, he told them to gather enough for 2 days. Just that one day. Why? So they wouldn't have to go out and gather for themselves to provide for themselves and their family on the seventh day. Why? Because it's meant to be a day of rest. So anything that you do that is meant to provide for yourself and your family, your livelihood or your career, here's what God says. There is a day when you're supposed to cease. There's a day when you're supposed to stop. There's a day when you're supposed to rest. Why? Why? Let me give you a few quick reasons why. All right, a few quick reasons, and they're there in your notes. Number one, to remind us that we're not God. There's a reason that you've been designed to rest. You need rest. In fact, let me give you a simple example. It's a very simple example, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to count to 3, and we're all going to breathe in, and then we're going to breathe out as long as we can. I want you to keep breathing out, and by the way, if you can't do this, please don't do it. I don't want anybody passing out or... So we're going to breathe out, and I don't want you to breathe back in. As long as you can, just keep breathing out, keep breathing out. Okay, ready? So I'm count to 3, we'll breathe in, and then out. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Anybody keep going? What's the point? You're not designed to constantly breathe out. You have to breathe in. See, our problem is we're constantly breathing out. We're constantly working and moving and going outward. God says you were designed to have to breathe in. You were designed in a way that you have to rest. Why? Because if you never have to rest, if I never had to rest, you know what? It would be easy for me to start thinking that I'm all powerful. God designed you with a need for rest so that you would remember that you're not God. He's God. So number one, Sabbath reminds us, it puts us in our place in terms of our relationship with God. He's on the throne. He's the one who is all powerful, not me. Number two, it reminds me of my dependence on God. One of the conversations that I've had with my kids, I'm sure we'll have it more often, is this question over why do we stop and thank God for our food? Why do we do that? I mean, and this is how it goes. Dad, didn't you earn this? Didn't you work for this? I mean, you were the one who really got the money and bought the... Mom went out and you guys went out and bought the food and did what we... Mom's the one who cooked it. God didn't cook us for us. So why in the world are we stopping to thank God? Because at the end of the day, it all belongs to Him. And it's all from Him. Do you have to work in order to provide for your family? Yes, you do. But you have to understand at the end of the day, Job says, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. He's the one who's in charge. You can work really hard and make hardly anything. God is the one who blesses you. God is the one who gives to you. God is the one who provides for you. At the end of the day, it's rooted in Him. Look at what this Deuteronomy chapter 8, right there in your notes, towards the bottom of the page. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the power to get wealth. How in the world do you get those things that you get? God gave you the power for it. He gave you the ability for it. He gave you the mind for it. At the end of the day, it all finds its root back in God. And some of us keep working because we believe that our success, our wealth is dependent on us alone. That God is not the one who provides. We go by that saying, God helps those who help themselves. It's not a verse in the Bible. If God is in charge, God's the one who provides. And trust me when I say this, at the end of the day, you are dependent on God for everything that you have. The Sabbath is a day to remember that. God provides, not me. Do I have to work? Yes, I do. I have to work hard 6 days of the week. But there's a seventh day where I'm supposed to rest to remember that at the end of the day, God's the one who provides. He's the one who takes care of us. I am dependent on Him. When David and the people of Israel take an offering for the building of the temple, he prays afterwards and he says, but who am I and what is my people that we should be able thus to offer willingly? For all things come from you and of your own we have given you. Is this your attitude when it comes to your wealth, with your finances? That when we give, that we say, God, what right do we have to be able to give this? It's yours anyway. It's all from you. It belongs to you, not to me. He says, O Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building you a house for your holy name comes from your hand and is all your own. Sabbath reminds you, it's not yours, it's not you, it's all God and your dependence on Him. It doesn't mean that you didn't work, and it doesn't mean that you don't go out and earn a paycheck, but the reason that you're able to do that is because God provides. And Sabbath reminds you of that. Number 3, to remind us how we're saved. Do you remember When God goes in and rescues Israel from Egypt, does he rescue them by them working or by them trusting him? Remember, they come to the borders of the Red Sea. They got the sea on the one side and Pharaoh's army on their own. If they relied on themselves at that point, would they be alive or dead? Because if it's me and I'm relying on myself standing on the borders of the Red Sea, either number one, I'm going to try to swim across, which isn't going to work, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try running. And they're in chariots. It's not going to last. When God first commands the people of Israel to Sabbath, look at Deuteronomy 5:15 at the bottom of your notes there. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, this is what God's rooting it in. I came, I saved you, I did it all, not you. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the stopping day, the Sabbath day. Why did I command you this? So that you remember how you were saved. Not because you did it, but because I did it. Not because you worked your salvation. In fact, you remember, here's what God has Moses say to them on the border of the Red Sea as they're waiting for Pharaoh's army to come down on them. Here's what Moses says, fear not, stand firm, which actually the literal translation of that is stand still. You don't have to run. And see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. Who's working for your salvation? God's the one who's done it. Verse 14. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. You know, the Sabbath is a celebration of the gospel. How is it that we're saved? By working hard for God? Romans chapter 4, verse 5, but to him who stops working and believes, to him it is counted as righteousness. It's not by your works, it's not by your effort. The Sabbath is a reminder that my salvation is not based on my own works, but on the works and the finished work of God. Christ came and did the work for me already. And I can rest in that. It's a day to remember it's all grace. Number 4, it's a day for physical and spiritual renewal. I said earlier, Sabbath isn't about sitting in front of the TV all day, and here's why. Because there's a context for getting true rest. Take a look. Psalm 23, we quote this all the time. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. How do you get your soul restored? There's a context to it. Who gives you rest? I'm not saying that watching a television show is a bad thing. But if we think that the way that we rest is by disconnecting from everything and plugging into technology, then we've missed the boat, because the context of rest is God himself. That's where rest comes from. He's the one who makes you lie down in green pastures. He's the one who restores your soul. Read Isaiah 40, the very next verses. It's they who wait on the Lord, their strength shall be renewed. They'll mount on wings like eagle. Not those who wait on themselves. It's those who wait on the Lord. D.K. Stewart says this: the Sabbath is the stopping day, the day on which one's regular work ceases, both for the sake of giving laborers a break from their daily routine and for the sake of providing a focus on God that is periodically, weekly heightened. It's not just about disconnecting things from your life. It's about refocusing things in your life, particularly refocusing on your relationship with God. If you're not getting a deeper connection on your Sabbath with God, if you're using your Sabbath just as a day for leisure and rest aren't necessarily the same. The world has leisure, we have rest. And it's in the context of our relationship with God. You can't get rest otherwise. It's a day for physical and spiritual renewal, and the only way that happens is in the context of our relationship with God. Right? Last two things is why he gave it. Number 5, to enable us for greater love and service. Have you noticed a connection between your lack of rest and your lack of love for other people? I don't know about you, but when I'm not rested, I am very irritable. I have a hard time serving other people. There's a reason for that. Look at Mark chapter 1 here. Mark chapter 1, here's what Jesus does. And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. He's drawing back. He's breathing in. This is Jesus, God the Son, in flesh and blood, and once again, he's giving us a picture of what it looks like to be truly human. We need rest. We need time where we're drawing into the presence of God. And verse 36, and Simon and those who were with him searched for him. The word is hunted for him. You ever feel, and look at how it says, and they found him and said, everyone's looking for you. Do you ever feel like that's your life? Everyone is looking for you. Where? You have expectations, there's responsibilities, there's things you're supposed to do. What in the world are you doing being so selfish? And by the way, when we Sabbath rest, there's some people who are going to say, you're just being selfish. It's all about you. Not at all. Because look what happens next. Verse 38, and he said to them, let us go out to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that's why I came out. He's not talking about that's why I came into the world. He's talking about why he came out of his withdrawing into the presence of God for prayer. He's saying, you found me not because you're good at hide and seek. You found me because I came out. And the reason I came out is because I came out to serve. But the reason I can serve is because I went in. You cannot, without rest, truly love and serve other people. And again, the Sabbath isn't just for disconnecting. It's actually for reconnecting and for serving other people. Luke 13, Jesus heals on the Sabbath. Everybody's upset about it. Not because he's actually breaking the Sabbath, but because he's breaking the extra rules that the Pharisees have added to it. Because it's not a day to not move. It's a day to stop working so that I can love and serve others even better. And the last thing I'll say is it's a day to practice for the future. It's a day of preparation. Yes, every day we have rest in Christ. We don't have to do works in order to earn our salvation with God. We've been given an eternal rest already, but there is coming a deeper experience of rest than you will ever have in this world. That's what's coming. And on the Sabbath day, that's what we practice. We're practicing for eternity. And again, I'm not saying eternity is sitting around doing nothing. We're going to serve in heaven. It tells us that in Revelation. But what we are going to be is at complete rest because we will be in the presence of God. When you practice Sabbath, you're practicing for eternity. And if all that is true, and I believe that it is, if all of it's true, then why in the world do we resist practicing the Sabbath? Why do you fight it? Why is it that you have such a hard time stopping? Why is it that you and I cannot sit down? We actually feel, I don't know about you, maybe you can relate to this. You feel guilty when you're sitting still. You feel guilty when you're actually stopping. Why is that? You got to answer that question for yourself. 3 reasons I'll give you. Lack of faith, idolatry, and materialism. Those are, I think, 3 big reasons that people struggle to rest. Number 1, lack of faith. It's because you don't trust that God's going to provide unless you're helping yourself. Back in Exodus 16, God said, gather for enough for tomorrow. And yet on the Sabbath, people still go out to gather food. Why? Because they don't trust that God's provided enough for them. Some of us keep working because we don't trust God enough. We think it's all on us, and therefore I have to keep moving. And if I don't keep moving, it's all going to get pulled out from under me. Do you believe that God is in charge or not? Do you really believe that God is dependent on you constantly working in order to provide for your family and in order for you to do your job effectively? Look, there's secular studies that have been done that tell you if you work over a certain number of hours, your productivity goes way down. When you're not getting rest, even the world recognizes that when you don't rest, you can't work. Not well. But some of us lack the faith. Number 2, some of us, it's idolatry. Our identity is and security and happiness is wrapped up in our jobs. We work because that's who we are. You're not finding identity and security and happiness in God. Your identity and security is wrapped up in your work. And here's the thing. If that's true, then you can't stop working because your work is how you prove that you matter. Your work is how you prove that you have worth. When my identity and security and happiness is wrapped up in God, I don't have to work every day. I can rest and be at peace because I am not defined by my job. And the last one is materialism. Some of us work because we want stuff. Some of us work because we've already got too much stuff and we can't pay the bills. I can't stop working. I'll stop. I'll take the Sabbath at some point in time, but I got to work every day now so that I can have enough money to take the Sabbath later on. Or, I went out and I bought so much stuff and I'm in so much debt that I don't have a choice but to work 2 jobs and to work every single day. I cannot take rest. Those are just 3 reasons that I'll give you. See if you can relate to them. You see what's in your own heart. But you've got to answer the question, because we cannot practice and obey the command to Sabbath if we don't deal with the root things that are keeping us from it. There's something in your way for every single one of us. And what is it for you? Let me just say this. How do we actually practice it? How do we actually make Sabbath a priority? Let me just give you these things very briefly. Number 1 is that you've got to plan and prepare. Sometimes you can't Sabbath because you didn't get the things done you needed to so you could have that day of rest. You got backed up. You got distracted by other things. If you don't plan and prepare, you won't be able to Sabbath. That's why God told the people of Israel, gather manna enough for tomorrow today so that you don't have to worry about it tomorrow. If it's a priority in your life, see, your other 6 days should be responsive to that day, not that day responsive to the other 6 days. In other words, that's the priority, not the other 6 days. Yes, you need to work, but you are working in such a way for 6 days, which by the second point, work hard the other 6 days, so that on the 7th day you can actually stop. Part of the reason we don't Sabbath is because the barrier between work and rest has completely dissolved in our lives. We work when we're supposed to be resting, and we rest when we're supposed to be working. It's all jumbled together. And I'll give you 2 examples. And again, I'm not trying to be legalistic about this. You could take it this way. I'm challenging you to take a look inside. 2 examples. We rest when we're supposed to be working, and here's just an example of that. It's when you browse the internet or you go on Facebook every 15 minutes at your job and you watch the little cute kitty videos. Right? What are you doing? Is that now, if it's your job, then you know. But for I think all of us, our job is not checking Facebook. Our job isn't surfing the internet. Our job isn't going shopping. Our job isn't yet. That's many of, and all of us probably can relate in this room. What are we doing? We're resting when we're supposed to be working. We're disconnecting from our job. And by the way, what does that cause? I've got to still do my job. I still got to get my work done. If I don't get my sermon done in preparation for this morning on the other 6 days of the week, I can't rest. I'm going to have to get up and give a sermon. I don't have a choice. But part of the problem is if I'm resting when I'm supposed to be working, I'm going to have to work when I'm supposed to be resting. And an example of you working when you're supposed to be resting, let me ask you this question. When you're supposed to be resting, how often do you check your cell phone? How often do you check your emails and respond to them? Some of us have PBV. Some of us have PBV. It's not as bad as it sounds, but it is. PVS, phantom vibration syndrome. Do you know what it is? It's when your phone is not in your pocket and it's not even ringing, but you're feeling the vibration right here. Somebody has to be calling me, and you're reaching in you've experienced it. Why? Because we are so connected to this. Putting it down. I left my phone here last Sunday night. And I couldn't remember where it was. And I'm going, I've got to find it. I've got to find it. And Sarah's calling it. And I'm looking around for it. And I felt like I'd lost a limb. I left my arm at work. We're working when we're supposed to be resting, and we're resting when we're supposed to be working. You want Sabbath? One of the things that you can do is make it a priority to disconnect from technology. Technology was a lie. We were told that we would get so technologically advanced that we'd have more time for rest. The opposite has happened. Now we have more ability to work. And that's what we do. We don't rest more, we work more. In fact, we do it all the time. We are expected, and we expect of ourselves, perhaps more than others expect of us, to be constantly connected and responding immediately. You have to make it a priority, to set it apart. And here's just the last few things. All right, number 4. Practice slowing down. See if you can picture this with me. You go to the grocery store, and there's those people who seem like they're at vacation at the grocery store. Do you know what I'm talking about? They walk so slow, and they're just pushing their cart. And you're getting frustrated Because it seems like there's a person every few feet and you're trying to drive around them with your cart. And it's like, can you please get out of it? What are you doing? We have places to be. And you're frustrated with them and just mumbling under your breath. It's those stinking people with their carts and wandering around. And then you get up to the front. And tell me you haven't done this, right? You get up to the front and you're examining the lines. Right? There's 2 people in that line. There's 2 people in this line. But how many things do they have in their cart? And you're kind of standing in this line. And then it's like, you're almost, kind of, I'm going to go over there, but no, I'm staying. And then somebody else gets in there. And here's what you're doing. Then you're standing there and you're watching to see who's going to get out first. And of course, the person in your line is the person who has to get a price check. And the little red light goes on and it's flashing. And then you're muttering under your breath again. You go, I shouldn't have been in this line. Why is that? Because we're constantly in a rush. We're constantly in a rush, and you can't slow down. And anytime you have to, you get angry because somebody is getting in the way of your hectic life. On the Sabbath day, practice getting in the long line. Be the annoying person who walks slow. Just not when I'm there. 2 more. Practice your spiritual disciplines. If the Sabbath is meant to be a day to reconnect with the Lord, to grow in our relationship with Him, then there has to be time. I'm not telling you all day long you got to be sitting there reading your scripture, fasting and praying. That's not what I'm saying. Maybe there are times you need to do that. But what I am saying is if you're never getting... One of the reasons I think we're not very good at reading our Bibles is because we don't Sabbath. Imagine if every week you set time aside, and it is possible. You can't tell me it's not. I know it is. You set time aside to just be in the Word, to make it that much more of a priority. It's not that you shouldn't be in the Word the rest of the week, but to make it an even greater focus on that day. If we were doing that each week, how much better would we be at listening to God's Word the rest of the week? Practice your spiritual disciplines, and here's the last one. Practice pulling back and celebrating. You look at the rhythm of creation. God creates and He celebrates. He creates and He celebrates. He creates and He celebrates. You know what our problem is? Is we're constantly trying to make, but never stepping back to celebrate. I've seen this actually in our community, in our church. And it's one of the things that we're going to see change this year. Realized it this last week. Sunday morning we come in and it's like I'm preaching and I believe that the message is important. But one of the things that we have not been doing, I believe enough of, is to pull back and to celebrate what God's doing together as a community. And we're going to start doing that. We're going to do it this morning in baptism. Next week we're going to do it. I'm going to give you the opportunity to actually share what you see God doing in your life and in your ministry. We're going to do it as a group, in a large group. You're going to be able to say it out loud. We're going to do more of those things. My plan is to have one of our ministries come up from time to time just to say, hey, here's what God's doing in my ministry. Because here's the good news. God is doing things all over the place. But we're not, we're stepping back to celebrate. God's doing things all over the place in your life. The problem isn't that He's not doing it. It's that you're not stepping back to celebrate it. And if you don't get the rhythm, you're going to be breathing out, trying to constantly work and never getting any rest. Jesus says, God did not make man for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man. In other words, the Sabbath was a gift for you. Stop treating it as a job. Start celebrating it as the gift that it is.